But I will be kicking it off now to the CEO of jetAVIVA, Emily. So, Emily, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everybody. We're really excited to be here, and thank you to CJP and Liz and Rob for allowing us to meet with you guys today. We've put together a ton of great information. We're excited to share it with you. But before we get into that, I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I'm Emily Deaton. I do have the honor of serving as the CEO of jetAVIVA. I've been with the firm for 7 years, and prior to that, my experience was with Embraer Executive Jets. So I've been working with owner-flown aircraft for most of my career, and very excited to have the pleasure of doing that with a highly specialized group like jetAVIVA now. My goal today with you is to give a high-level context of what we're seeing in the marketplace. That's going to cover all makes and models and segments because I think it sets an appropriate context for you guys to then understand the differences and the nuances that we see within the individual make model segments that we specialize in. And so I'm delighted to have my team here with me today. I have Jade Hofeldt, Max Oberbroeckling, and Jason Deifik, and they're going to dig into specific segments that they spend their days tracking and knowing better than anyone else in the industry. And they'll be able to share with you what those differences are between what we're seeing in the market as a whole and what we're seeing in the markets that we specifically specialize in, which a lot of those are aircraft owned and operated by the CJP membership. There are other markets, I'm sure, that we won't touch on specifically in their updates, but we do welcome your questions and we're happy to give you a quick answer. And then if there's anything we cannot answer specifically today, we are more than happy to follow up with you. We have all of this data available to us. It doesn't mean we necessarily have it in our fingertips or we could cover it all in just this webinar, but we're happy to follow up if needed. So please don't hesitate to ask us any questions. If we can field it today, we will. And if not, we'll get with you guys afterwards. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Before I share a couple slides that I put together for you, I'm just going to give you a high pass on what we're tracking as we get settled into 2026. There are a few things that we always look to that seem to be key market drivers in our industry. One of those is wealth. One of those is bonus depreciation and tax incentive. And the other one that has become a new one for us, and I think it's worth mentioning because it's been in the news quite a bit, is the tariff situation. That doesn't necessarily directly affect citation manufactured products, but it does affect industry demand. And so I think it's worth mentioning where we sit today when you think about the tariff climate. So all of these things are going to be variables that signal how the industry is behaving as we head into a new year. With the reinstatement of bonus depreciation last year, we saw a significant uptick in demand, especially as we entered into late third and all of the fourth quarter. What's interesting about bonus depreciation or immediate expensing, as they like to call it from the National Business Aviation Association, is that it is for the first time continuing at 100%. So what we did not see, as we've seen previously, was that decline in your available depreciation from 100 down to 80, and then it went down to 60. Now with this new reinstatement, we are remaining at 100%. So while we did see a significant upswing in activity towards the late half of the year, what's interesting is a lot of that demand is continuing because the tax climate did not change as we rolled from 2025 into 2026. So for people that anticipate having the need to take an additional depreciation for whatever reason, that remains available to them this year. And we're already seeing people in their tax planning start to make moves in that direction. So I think it's going to continue to be a positive variable for our industry, but throughout the entire year as we go. On the wealth side, one of the things we do monitor regularly is just how the stock market is performing. Our industry does tend to trend along with the market, and the stock market's having a little bit of a challenging start to the year. Interestingly, though, there are some pretty significant wealth creation events that we are monitoring. One of those specifically being the SpaceX IPO. The amount of wealth that could be generated from that single event is unique and very compelling and something that could have an impact on our industry because as we've seen these instances of significant wealth creation, we also then seem to see people that enter into business aviation or increase their utilization of business aviation. Both are positive signals for our industry and something that we are monitoring closely. The other thing, though, that I mentioned and touched on was tariffs. So as of today, in fact, with the Supreme Court ruling on tariffs last week and the new tariffs that were implemented by the administration, civil aerospace is exempt. So as of today, there is a 0 for 0 tariff situation for civil aerospace. That would be aircraft, aircraft parts, all of these things that have been affecting aircraft ownership, transaction, maintenance events, etc. Those are now off the table. So we are now back to a 0 for 0 tariff climate in business aviation, which is a huge win for us. And I think is going to have an impact on how the market is behaving. So aircraft that previously were not desirable to be transacted and sold in the US because of their country of origin of manufacturer, everything is now back on the table now. So I think that is going to have an impact on how the industry treats supply and demand, and I think that will subsequently have an impact on pricing. So these are the kinds of things that we look at holistically, and I would say as we enter into the year, the market is in a healthy position. I'm going to share slides with you now. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So overall, we talked about all of these different signals. So what does that mean, right? This is a chart that we've looked at before. If you get our printed market reports, you've likely seen it. This is a bit of a more narrow time scope than we used to look at in the past. But what we're tracking here is the number of new listings that were brought to market in a given month. That's the black bar. And the green bar at the bottom is the number of aircraft that were sold or transacted in the same month. This is just showing you from January of 2023 to present. The reason we've broken this down in this way is because, frankly, the pandemic and the post-pandemic boom are likely always going to be very unique data points, not necessarily directly transferable to our current market environment. So if we want to try to compare apples to apples, we're using a slightly more narrow time window. So the big thing to notice here is that we did have quite a surge of activity in Q4, which I touched on. And you can see that big bump in December is your end of year push for getting things done before December 31st and likely being able to take advantage of that bonus depreciation if that was of interest to the buyer. But what you should also be noticing is we're starting to see a pretty significant trend and a drop in new inventory coming to market. And so as we enter into 2026, we are in a bit of an inventory constrained environment. And I know that Jade and Max and Jason are going to speak to that with more detail here in a second. I did run this same chart within the Citation aircraft specifically. So a lot of similarities here, but less spikes, so a little bit more consistency. And the other thing that I would point out here is, yes, definitely a strong fourth quarter for closings. We did see that. But the decline in inventory, in fact, started a bit earlier within the Citation space. So it is also on a downward trend in terms of new listings coming to market. And that trend started even earlier. So what does that mean for you? Supply is tight right now. If you have, especially for lower time, late model, desirable configuration aircraft, they are trading quickly, and we are seeing some of those less desirable or older or maybe configured not exactly as the market presents as ideal, sitting on the market a little bit longer. So we're starting to see a little bit of a separation in the market dynamic. But demand is holding steady, as I mentioned. So we're entering into 2026 with steady or perhaps even increased demand, especially over what we saw at the same time last year, and a tight inventory environment. And pricing effectively is divided. So it very much depends on what it is that you're selling, what the inventory situation is in that particular make, model, market segment. But for certain markets, pricing is very strong, if not up year over year. And in other markets, it's slightly down. But in no case are we seeing significant pricing pressure on the market with the supply and demand situation that we currently have. So that's my high level. That's the broad brush. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so that you can see our faces. And I am going to hand this off as we get into the weeds here a little bit and we talk about specific makes and models to my colleague, Jade Hofeldt. Jade, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Emily. Hey, everybody. Jade Hofeldt, jetAVIVA. I've been with the company going on about 12 years now. I've been heading up the Mustang market for the better part of a decade, having transacted nearing 100 different units, and had the opportunity in 2025 to once again lead the market with Mustang transactions, both bought and sold. So needless to say, we have a ton of data that we've been tracking. jetAVIVA, 20 years in business. The Mustang is also approaching 20 years old. So we have probably the better part of those 20 years of data to present. But that's not important. What's important is what's happening now in the market, what happened in 2025, and what we can expect in 2026. The Mustang market is probably the most boring market that exists in the citation world, because the same thing is happening now that was happening last year. I'm buying and selling airplanes for the same exact values that we were buying and selling them for 3 years ago. So if you're a Mustang owner, that's good news. It is literally one of the most stable markets that you could possibly get in, and definitely one of the most liquid of the light jet markets, with somewhere between 4 and 6 units trading every month, month over month, for the past 8 years. Emily just put up a slide here. If you take a look at where Mustang inventory lies versus pre-owned transactions, we're definitely off to a bit of a slow start here in January and February, but December was a busy year. A lot of buyers will reach out and advise that they're seeing more and more planes come to controller and the market is getting soft. I think at this point that's wishful thinking, because a lot is happening behind the scenes, airplanes that are transacting that are not showing up on controller. So yes, more planes are coming to the market, but the good ones are leaving just as quickly. And one interesting kind of data point that we saw in 2025, probably mid 2025, is average pricing actually rose in the Mustang market. But that's not because values saw an increase. It's because the market was very top heavy with late model, low time airplanes, the 2017s, the 2016s, really 2012 and up. We were really top heavy, which is, going to have an effect on the market because the majority of production happened in the years 2008 through 2010. So when we see those later models become top heavy on the market, it drives pricing upwards, but it's not really a true trend of what's happening in pricing. It was just availability in mid 2025. The other thing that we saw was more than half of the inventory was living outside of the US. So a lot of foreign options, which made US good options, especially lower priced options, move quickly because there just were not that many. We've since seen the market come back to be more normalized in terms of 2009 model years, for example, are leading the market in what's available right now. And pricing has, kind of come back to what we had been used to, which is somewhere in the low twos is where average pricing is sitting, right around the $2 million mark. The latest and greatest Mustangs are still trading in the upper twos to low threes. And you can find some of those older model, higher time airframes sub 2 million. But there are a lot of buyers that want to be sub 2 million. So just know that those ones move fast. I know in previous market updates, folks have been interested about the Globair fleet that is moving out of the market as they start to replace it with M2s. Globair still does have a number of high time airframes, 6,000 to 8,000 hours, that are available, sitting over in Europe on non-US NREG, but they are systematically moving those out as they replace them with M2s. So they are not flooding the market. They are not changing the market values in general. And those are slow movers. Majority of buyers want to be somewhere around the 3,000 hour mark or less, which is really where the fleet average hours are sitting at. There are 472 Mustangs currently in the fleet. And things like new paint, new interior, of course, the NXI upgrade. The majority of the fleet has been converted to NXI already. but paint and interior and cosmetics are starting to have kind of a more effect, a larger effect on how quickly airplanes are moving in the market because buyers need a way to separate the different airplanes. And paint and interior are certainly one of them. And again, NXI is pretty much expected at this point. If it doesn't have it, it's not a big deal to do the update. Takes a week's time. I think base pricing still sits around 60,000 with some optional add-ons. But that is kind of the high level of what the Mustang market is doing. If you're a buyer and you're waiting to get into the market, you're waiting really for no reason because I don't expect a big change in data points as we move through 2026. And if you're a seller, you're probably in a good position, even if you bought the airplane here in the last 5 years, to get out of it for pretty much what you got into it for. Of course, if you bought it pre-COVID, you're still in a good position to make a substantial income revenue on the sale of that airplane. So I'm happy to open it up for questions if anybody has anything they'd like to specifically address in the Mustang.
What did you say the average hours are?
So average hours in the fleet is sitting right around 3,000 hours.
Good, thanks.
And I know as the fleet starts aging, like I said, it's coming up on 20 years old. Some people get concerned about parts availability, upcoming overhauls, hot sections, things like that. And we're still seeing Textron support the fleet at a very high level, which is good news for buyers and sellers alike. Of course, there's always part shortages just across the board in our industry as materials and things go through growing pains of becoming available. And the Mustang is no exception to that. But if we look at, where new turboprops are transacting and selling at the $5 million mark for TBMs and Epics and the like, man, at $2 million, even $3 million, the Mustang presents just an incredible value for what it offers. I don't think there's anything that beats it in terms of overall value.
Awesome. Jade, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving us all of your insights based on your tremendous amount of experience. We did get a question that came in prior to the webinar, and I just want to make sure we directly call it out, even though you did speak to a lot of this in your update. But, in your opinion, as you look ahead into the next 6 to 12 months, do you feel that the Mustang market is weakening, strengthening, or do you expect more consistency?
Yeah, I expect it to pretty much remain flat. We are seeing days on market tick up slightly, really for the past year since February this time last year. The days on market has ticked up. I think some of that is attributed to, like I said, some of those later model, higher price point Mustangs taking a little longer to transact because the majority of buyers want to be in that lower $2 million price point, sub $2 million if they can. That may be wishful thinking because there's not a lot of great options out there that are sub 2 million. But for the most part, I don't expect to see any huge changes. So no reason to wait. If you're buying or selling, now's as good a time as any.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And guys, if you have other questions about the Mustang, feel free to throw them in the chat or we'll have Q&A at the end. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and shift to some different markets. I'm excited to introduce Max Oberbroeckling. Max, you are up, and when you're ready, I will pull your slides up. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks, everybody. My name is Max, and I've been with jetAVIVA for going on 8 years now, and I track the Citation 525, CJ1, CJ1 Plus, the CJ2, and the CJ2 Plus. So we'll start with the 525, the straight CJ, and there's going to be a lot of similarities between some of these models. So bear with me, but also some important nuances that we're going to address. So the 525 has been around for 30 plus years now. There's a lot of stability in that market. As the fleet ages, there's higher time airplanes. There's also still some lower time airplanes to be found. Drivers there are going to be pedigree, cosmetics. Similar conversation with the Mustang. As the fleet ages, the airplanes that are selling are going to be the ones that have been upgraded over time, new interiors, new paint jobs, the full Garmin cockpit, That's what we see selling these days. So the fleet right now is sitting at 9% availability, where it tends to stay pretty stable there. Asking prices and selling prices are generally between the low 1 millions to the higher 1 millions for, upgraded airplanes, new cosmetics, and Garmin features. Inventory, like I said, it stays pretty stable. It's slightly down. We've come down maybe, a percentage over the last 6 months, and that has returned since December. So we're back up in that position with the average there selling around 3 units a month, sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more in the fourth quarter. But again, a very stable market, drivers being, good cosmetics and low time, which again, we're going to see that across all these airplanes as they continue to age, but the CJ specifically being, the first airplanes entering the market in 1993. So from there, we'll move on to the CJ1. CJ1 is sitting a little bit high right now, conversely to what we talked about with inventory being low. Some of these markets, can shift within a couple months. So the CJ1 has come up to 12%, just over 12%, with 24 airplanes available right now out of the 195 of the fleet. Similar pricing range, low 1 millions to high 1 millions, almost 2 million, but we haven't seen an airplane here sell for over 2 million in over the last year or so. And it's going to be the same drivers there as far as Garmin features. The new STC coming out last summer for the full Garmin cockpit is really going to be huge for the CJ1 to continue to provide value to that fleet over the years and coming years. Some of the trends we're seeing here, inventory has come up from 8% to 12% over the last 6 months. It's generally stays stable at higher 1 millions asking prices, a slight bump in December, which has come back down, and very similarly to the CJ1, or the CJ rather. But sales here are not quite as consistent as the CJ, but tends to average about 2 or 3 sales over the last 6 months, with a couple of months of no sales, but generally averaging about 2 to 3 sales a month. So moving on to the CJ1 Plus. This is a bit of an interesting market. This one moves a little bit slower than some of the others. There's only 99 airplanes in the fleet here. It butts right up against the M2. But it presents a compelling value for people who are looking for M2 platform, performance, FADEC airplane, but maybe don't need the Garmin G3000 or are budget constrained. So interesting value proposition here. Asking prices generally are, from the 2 million range up to the higher 2 millions, just right under the 3 million threshold. We have seen a couple airplanes trade for close to 2 million, some below 2 million. Those were a couple CAE trainers from last year. And a lot of the buyers here, a lot of the airplanes are going down to Brazil. Interestingly enough, about 50% last year went down to Brazil. Inventory here has come up to 12 to 13% over the last 4 months, but just recently dropped back down to 9%. And this is a smaller inventory market. So with not only 9 airplanes on the market, that can shift pretty dramatically. And part of the reason the pricing has shifted is because a couple of these airplanes that came off the market were late model airplanes, sub 2,000 hours, 2007 to 9 models. Interesting how that can impact the inventory percentage coming down. CJ1 Plus, as we mentioned, moves a little bit slower. So we're generally only seeing 1 to maybe 2 sales per month at the most. And what's selling here is price conscious buyers, as we talked about, just under the M2 market, looking for something, can't quite get over the 3 million threshold, but still want the same airplane, has generally been most of the conversations that we've been having here. And what drives them has been the low time, late model options. And from there, Emily, we will shift to the CJ2 and 2 Plus. So the CJ2 sitting right around under that 9% threshold right now, 21 units out of the 235 available in the fleet. Pricing very similar to the CJ1 Plus, but goes up to the low 3 millions. From 2 million to the low 3 million is kind of generally where we're seeing these trade. Average is about 2.5 to 2.7 million. Inventory trends were down over the last 12 months. We peaked at 12% Q1, but consistent over the last 6 months have been below 10%, down to where we are now, right at 8.9%. Asking prices here have generally been pretty stable, very similar to the CJ market. It's a stable platform driven by the upgrades that are available. So you've got the full Garmin upgrades. A lot of the airplanes in the fleet have them, and a lot of the buyers that we're talking to are looking specifically for the Garmin upgrades, the Garmin cockpit and the CJ2. And we're averaging right around 2 transactions per month, sometimes slightly less, but generally 2 transactions per month in the CJ2. Moving on to the 2 Plus, we are at 8.6%, very similar fleet size to the CJ2 with 19 available on the market. Pricing here is kind of the mid 3 millions to the upper 4 millions. Haven't seen anything really crest that 5 million threshold. You start to push up on the CJ3 there, which Jason will get into soon. Pricing trends in the CJ2 Plus market have been generally stable over the last 6 months. Slight dip in fourth quarter for inventory, and then pricing descending, moving since Q4. So we're averaging right around 2 sales per month in the CJ2 Plus, similar to some of the other markets, and part of that is just driven by the inventory that's available being under 8%, 9%, and really kind of lends itself to that 2 sales per month metric. And what's selling here is really competitively priced aircraft. These are price conscious buyers, mostly for the 2 Plus specifically. People need that airplane with the upgrades over the CJ2. So it's going to be driven by price conversations, airplanes with good pedigree. But it's a little bit different and more similar to the 1 Plus in the way that doesn't have all of the Garmin upgrades available that are driving some of the buying conversations there. And as I mentioned, a lot of similarities there, some nuances, but if there's any specific questions, we can go into those, or we can move on from there, but happy to help answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Max. And if anyone has a question, feel free to come off mute, but we did have a couple questions come in for people that registered for the webinar that I want to direct to you, Max. So we're going to jump into those if that's okay. And also thank you for sharing a lot of information on a lot of different markets very quickly. So again, for the room, if anybody wants to dig into the details of any of these markets, I know we had to go relatively fast through a lot of data. Please feel free to reach out to Max directly. One of the questions that came in, and I know you touched on this, but perhaps you could quantify it for us, is someone asked about the value from a monetary perspective of that Garmin panel upgrade for the CJ1 and the CJ2. What are you seeing in the market?
So we know that the upgrade costs just under 400,000 or so, depending on what options that you get. And it's obviously not a dollar for dollar amount, but generally it's dependent on each airplane specifically, driven by the rest of the cosmetics and the pedigree of the airplane. But it's I would say more so it's going to present an opportunity for you to sell faster than necessarily like doing the upgrade just to see the value return. But I would say in some conversations, it holds pretty close to 300,000 and above in value add to the airplane, certainly. And the CJ1 specifically is going to be an interesting one to watch as we move forward, since that STC came out last year. I think maybe 1 or 2 airplanes have been upgraded, maybe more heading into 2026, but it's relatively new. And so it is going to be, it's a bit of a crystal ball question headed into 26, but it's going to be similar to the CJ, and it's going to provide a lot of value for that market specifically. And as we go forward into the future and continuing to offer value to owners there.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Appreciate you weighing in. We did have one other question, and I know this can be a bit subjective, so Godspeed to you on answering it. But if you had to recommend the best paint companies for CJs, who would you recommend?
The best paint companies for CJs, I've seen the best work recently coming out of Duncan and Yingling down in Wichita.
Okay. All right. Not trying to play favorites. That's just what Max has seen recently. So,
Well, and a
say.
reminder to all the CJP members that Yingling does offer a 15% off discount to CJP. So
Amazing. See, great. Thank you, Liz, for that. Max, thank you so much. Appreciate you weighing in. With that, we're going to kick it over to Jason Deifik. Jason's going to be stepping us through some additional key markets for us. And so, Jason, I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, appreciate everybody joining us this morning. My name's Jason Deifik. This is beginning my 10th year at jetAVIVA. I manage the CJ2 and CJ3 markets based in Austin, Texas. Much like Max, we're going to cover a significant amount of information in a fairly short period here. So I think from a high level, M2 and CJ3 markets, I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record in that, things are very similar. Record, a really strong demand, record-setting sales activity or close to it, and increasingly constrained supply. And then, by the time end of year rolled around into today, very strong value and pricing retention. So Emily's got the M2 chart pulled up right now. Record demand and sales activity. There were almost 60 transactions in 2025 compared to 45 in 2024. So significant increase there, and the strongest sales year in the history of the M2. Of those 60 or nearly 60 airplanes, 23 were in Q4. So super strong end of year demand as well. And that was the strongest quarter ever in the M2 market. Year to date, that momentum's definitely carried over. There's already been 7 transactions to close in 2026, and there's 2 additional aircraft pending sale. Fleet-wise, there are 306 aircraft in operation. Inventory kind of held steady between 6 and 7.5% for most of 2025 before falling there at the end of the year. Year over year, where we sit today, we're currently 17 aircraft listed for sale, which is 5.5% and 25% lower than where the market was this time in 2025. Still above, the historic lows we saw following COVID, but very healthy overall. Pricing was relatively flat to slightly downward. It was softish to begin the year last year, but kind of stabilized and held relatively strong through the rest of the year. I'd say down approximately 1% over the last 12 months, but it's really scattered depending on what kind of aircraft and what the specifics are as far as total time and program status. Current asking prices range from the low mid threes to the upper fours for most aircraft. And transactionally, we were seeing airplanes sell anywhere from, there was actually one that just closed in the mid twos without an engine program up to the low mid fours for late model, low time. Highest demand, buyers are typically looking for the following: either a mid three aircraft, something sub 1,000 hours in the 4 range, or something the lowest time, latest model possible. Owner pilots obviously typically prefer 2020 or newer, serial number 1048 and up, as it has the software upgrades, or an aircraft that's been upgraded with the hardware and software will typically sell faster than the rest of the market, albeit a limited pool, as owner pilots place a value there that backseaters don't necessarily place. Into Gen 2 market, 2025, it's still a relatively newish market, so continued to mature, but reach new heights for its market history. There were just over 20 transactions for the year. That's nearly double what the market saw in 2024. Year to date, there have been 2 Gen 2 transactions so far in 2026. Textron delivered 16 approximately Gen 2s last year, which brought the fleet to 94 aircraft in operation. For most of the year, supply was actually outpaced transactions. So even though we had what was the best year transactionally in that market, As you can see here, inventory actually rose before dropping with strong end of the year demand in Q4. 7 aircraft listed for sale today, which is 7.5% approximately. Pricing slightly downward, softened, through Q2, but stabilized there at the end of the year and held relatively flat from Q4 to today. Say year over year, it's down approximately 2%. Asking prices currently range from the mid fives to the low sixes. Sales trends we saw in 2025. Low total time aircraft definitely selling faster than aircraft with slightly higher time and lower asking prices. So the market is valuing total time over price. There were a few aircraft that sold 5, 6, even 1,000 hours last year, and those sat significantly longer than the lower time aircraft that were priced higher. That is what I have for the into Gen 2 market. We can go on to the 3 market, Emily, or should we pause for questions there?
Let's pause for a second because we do have a specific question on the M2 market. And of course, we can open it up to the room here. But while people are considering if they have a question, I'll ask you this one. Perhaps you could shed a little bit of light. And I think, again, you did touch on this in your update, but one of our guests had a question on how we determine the value of a 5 to 10-year-old M2. And I know that's a big range. So maybe you could speak to just the things that we look at when, running evaluation on an M2 in this market dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it truly is dynamic, right? Because what's true today is not necessarily true this Friday, because it's all about what have you done for me lately, what's on the market that you're competing against, and what aircraft have recently sold. So that can move the needle quickly. And it is it's a combination of things that kind of play into value. But that's what we're looking at. We judge an aircraft by its history, where it's lived, where it's been maintained, engine program status, its total time, its cosmetics, and what options it has. And then we stack that up versus A, what's on the market, what's the closest competing aircraft, and B, what's transacted recently. And you kind of weigh different things heavily or more lower based on those factors. And then we come up with where we would expect the aircraft to sell. And oh, it's aviation, so the crystal ball is only as good as today. And I think we're really good at this, but ask us again in a week, and certainly that has the ability to change.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I will just share with the room, and I think a lot of people know this, or I hope that they do, but we are happy to run evaluation on your airplane specifically. This is something that we offer. You don't have to be a signed client with us. We offer this service to you to help you just keep a pulse on the value of your airplane. It's something that we're more than happy to look into. So if you're curious what the value of your aircraft is heading into this year, based on a lot of the variables that Jason discussed, it is a moving target. But if you want to just get an update, we're more than happy to run this exercise for you. So please reach out. We'll ask you some questions. We need to get a sense for all of these different variables, and then we'll come back with a number based on today's market dynamic. So do take us up on that.
I would say, Emily, that not only applies to your current market edification, where's my airplane sit compared to what's available today, but also you want to make sure you're not overinsured or underinsured based on the current value of the aircraft. So another important reason to reach out and check on the value as it sits today.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll let you go ahead and move on to the CJ3. I'll pull the slides back up for you.
Thank you. So CJ3, 3+ market, the market's had a fantastic year, and jetAVIVA had a great year. We had the opportunity to transact more CJ3 and 3+ aircraft than any other dealer broker in the world in 2025. I'd say in the CJ3 market, the message is stability and consistency. There were 40+ transactions in 2025, so the market averaged over 3 transactions a month. Good liquidity, continued stable demand, down slightly from the 48 transactions we saw in 2024, but still a very solid year comparatively. Year to date, a little slow so far. There's been 1 transaction to take place in 2026. There are currently 4 aircraft pending sale, so certainly we expect transactions to pick up speed here in the short term. Fleet-wise, fleet currently sits at 410 aircraft in operation. Inventory peaked at 24 aircraft at the beginning of the year, back in February, and then kind of steadily decline through the rest of 2025. As we sit today, there are 17 aircraft listed for sale, just over 4% of the fleet. Again, higher than some of what we saw post COVID back in 2021 and 2022, but still a very healthy number comparatively, and lower than we've sat the last couple of years. Excuse me. Pricing. It's fairly soft to begin the year through midsummer, and then we saw pricing rise across the second half of the year. All in all, finished the year up approximately 2% from where the year started. Current asking prices range from the mid fours to the upper mid fives, and aircraft are typically trading in that mid to low fours range up into the low fives. Aircraft with the highest demand, lots of demand for something 2009 or newer with WAS LPV and sub 3,000 hours. Mid-time aircraft that can be bought in the fours, and then even higher time aircraft in the low fours and under. There's a whole nother piece of the market that values and highly demands that piece of equipment. CJ3 Plus wise, record demand and record sales activity. The market had its strongest year to date in 2025 and its strongest quarter ever in Q4. There were approximately 45 transactions in 2025 compared to 31 in 2024, so a significant increase. And record end of year demand as 20 transactions closed over the last 60 days of 2025. This is also worth noting. It's the first time the CJ3 Plus market has ever surpassed or exceeded the CJ3 market sales. The fleet, or actually Textron delivered approximately 25 CJ3 Pluses in 2025. That brought the fleet to approximately 312 aircraft currently. Inventory, despite strong sales activity, rose, right, as listings outpaced sales for much of the year, peaking in October and then sharply declined with the strong last 60 days at the end of the year. Currently, there are 12 CJ3 Pluses listed for sale, just under 4% of the market, and a couple of those are currently pending. Demand, as we talked about, one of the strongest years that market's ever had. What folks are looking for are late model, low time, right? So the 2022, 3, 4, 5 aircraft with sub 300 hours tend to sell quickly and at a premium comparatively to what those folks paid. And then there's another segment of the market looking for, sub 9 or even sub 8 kind of mid-time airplanes. And then we haven't seen a lot over the last 24 months, but we saw it pop up a couple times over the last 3 months, which is higher time aircraft that can be bought in the mid and low sixes. Overall pricing finished up 2 to 4% from where it started the year. And, again, strong demand drives that. Other takeaways just across the board for these markets, we kind of talked about, again, record demand, record sales activity. With demand starting so low and in all of the M2 and 3 markets, I don't expect much of that to change in this forward with new deliveries set to come out with the auto throttle equipped M2 Gen 2 and the Gen 3 CJ3, or excuse me, Gen 2 CJ3 with auto throttles as well. And I don't see much change as far as pricing or even inventory goes initially this year. Looking further down the road, it's a question on, where we sit with Textron and deliveries. There's been a couple of the Gen 2 CJ3s to deliver. I'm guessing 7 or 8 of the auto throttle equipped M2s to deliver. I know the auto land aircraft are supposed to start delivering in Q1 2027. Feels like that may push closer to mid or late 2027 based on current production delays. But with the time for to get on the list for a new delivery out until late 2027 or 2028 for both of these models, I don't expect the pending new deliveries of these models this year to have much of an effect on current M2 or CJ3 pricing. Also, special shout out to, we had the privilege of working with a number of CJP members this year. You guys are an important part of what we do. It's a lot of our business. It's a lot of our repeat business, and we very much appreciate this group's support.
Awesome. Very well said, Jason. And I echo his gratitude as well. And thank you so much for that update. Really nicely done. And again, I know you covered a lot of information there, but appreciate you getting into the weeds for us. So We're actually tracking really nicely on time. We have about 15 minutes remaining for this scheduled webinar, and we really do encourage you to ask questions. Those are the markets that we prepared a dedicated update for, as it covers a broad section, but we also recognize that there are a lot of additional makes and models that are owned and operated by the CJP community. So if you guys have any questions, encourage you to go ahead and ask, or go ahead and throw that in the chat, and I can work through those. But we did have a couple of additional questions come in the prep work here. So the first one I'm going to pass over to Jade. Jade, this is a combo question, so you can take it however you'd like. But the first part of the question is, how does a prospective buyer find a buyer's broker to represent them? So obviously, we as brokers feel like this is a little bit of a weighted question for us, but I'll let you answer that as neutrally as possible for the room here. And then the second part of the question is how to find a reliable maintenance facility to perform a pre-buy. So really just thinking about finding great service providers in this industry. Would love to get your thoughts on that.
Fantastic. Well, we'll start with the first question, which is how to find a good buyer's broker. And I think sometimes there's some confusion in the brokerage world of aircraft sales where, yeah, we operate a bit like real estate, but also not like real estate. Meaning if you want representation, you pay for it. So if you want representation as a seller, you pay your agent. If you want representation as a buyer, you pay your agent. Some folks obviously have knowledge, time, and go it alone, and that's perfectly fine. We obviously encourage buyer representation because you don't want it to be weighted towards the seller's agent protecting your best interests. In terms of finding a buyer's agent, definitely go out and make some calls to more than one broker and find out, depending on which model you're looking at, how many airplanes they transact in that specific market on an annual basis. In general, what do they know about it? A lot of our opportunities in terms of representing buyers to find airplanes come from relationships. What we call off-market airplanes, which essentially just means it's not publicly listed on a public-facing website like Controller. We consider anything that's not listed like that to be quote-unquote off-market, but having those relationships with owners oftentimes gives a broker access to those airplanes before the general public know about them, and that creates opportunity for a buyer. The other thing you can, at least ask the broker that you're interviewing is if they're a member of IATA, which is the International Aircraft Dealers Association. There's a lot of great brokers that are part of that group. IATA really upholds the standard for what brokers should be doing, how they should be acting, what the criteria is to properly represent buyers and sellers. So those are just, some suggestions, but I think just knowing that they know that market that you're looking to get into is super important. And then who is helping them, right? Are they trying to do everything? When you get to the pre-buy phase, how do you know what sort of work scope to do? Who's watching your back and protecting your best interests? Oftentimes, if a broker is trying to do everything by themselves, from the marketing to the overseeing the pre-buy to knowing the market data, that can become just a lot. So having a team to back them up is oftentimes helpful and will benefit you as the buyer because, as we all know, you get what you pay for, and sometimes paying the cheapest rate might result in you either overpaying or missing out on an even better opportunity. So hopefully that answers that first question. The second question, which was how do you find a good maintenance facility? There are some great ones. Obviously, when we're talking Citation, everybody immediately kind of gravitates to the Textron service centers, and they are wonderful, but there are a lot of other third-party service centers that are just as great, if not better. The Westars of the world, the Elliots, the Duncans. And again, going to those service centers and finding out, do you work on a lot of Mustangs or M2s or Citations, and just making sure that they know the ins and the outs and what to look for and what are the gotchas of this specific make and model that you're looking at. And then, of course, price shopping to find out what they're going to charge and what does that standard pre-buy include, or what other a la carte items can you get done, even to the extent of, hey, this airplane is due for a Doc 10. in the 525 world, can I utilize that as my pre-buy inspection? So having somebody looking out for you, whether that's the service center or your broker themselves, helping you direct that will just create value for you in the end and make sure you're not missing something or skipping out on something.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jade, and really appreciate you fielding that. We're happy to provide recommendations, especially like scenario-based recommendations. It's always something we're happy to dig into with you. We have a lot of experience with not only a lot of the maintenance providers, but also with other brokers as well. So happy to weigh in as needed. I do appreciate Jade mentioning the International Aircraft Dealers Association. If you're not familiar with it, you can go to iata.aero, and they do have a full list of everyone that has received that accreditation standard, that not only we have to earn on the front end, but we also have to uphold annually by achieving a certain standard, maintaining continuing education, and certifying our brokers team. So there's a comprehensive list there of everyone that's done that, and it is a resource that's available to you. I see we have a question in the chat from Jonathan. Jonathan, hi, thank you for asking. In very general terms, how would an aircraft not on engine programs affect its liquidity? Max, I'm going to go ahead and kick that over to you if you wouldn't mind fielding that for us.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. And it's an important question because we do run into that scenario. And just because an airplane's not on an engine program doesn't mean that it's a good airplane. Jason and I are actually going through this right now with a couple airplanes, and we talk about this regularly. So it really depends on, where are the engines at? Where's the competition at? So if there's a similar airplane that's priced out there, that's a very similar comp to yours that is or isn't on a program, where are they priced at? And then what does the buy-in look like for the engine program? Because the reality is most of the buyers here are going to be looking at the engine program. So what does the buy-in look like? Where does a deferment come in? What is the price to get on a deferment and get coverage on the engines? And then it comes down to the buyer specifically. So are they going to be a high utilization buyer? Are they going to fly 400 hours a year? Or is it, the overhauls, the reality is if you fly at 100 hours a year, you're not going to have to do them for 20 years. Those are all considerations. And so the reality is that it takes a certain buyer. It takes a certain buyer, and it takes a seller that understands that, without that money sitting in there in the account with Williams, for instance, it is going to affect the value, and it is it's a unique situation, airplane by airplane. So it's really hard to justify it as a broad conversation, but rather we look at each one and we look at where they are in the engine's life. As with a 525, it's going to affect your TBO. So are you past that first overhaul? Are you just coming up on it? If you put it on the program, then you're going to extend it out to 5,000. All of those things factor into the way we look at that. But the main thing that I would say is it comes down to, what does the buy-in look like? What does the deferment look like to just get coverage? And, where are the buyers at right now? Because there are people out there that are looking for airplanes that are not on engine programs. Just a smaller group. Hope that answers the question. If not, Jonathan, you've got my contact info. We can connect offline.
It does. Thank you. And I've just jumped on. I hope that's okay. I just wanted to say thanks, Emily and Jade and the whole team, for your work on the engine program guide. You did all the work. It came out last year, and I know we're working on the update for 2025 with the recent pricing. So thank you for that. And I really wanted to say that, the topic of engine programs is a really complicated one. And people react to just the price alone, which has been a really hot topic in our community. But with the guide that came out and the discussions, it shifted the discussions to one of real value. It's not just you're paying in the bank for the planned mechanical needs, the overhauls and things like that. It's market liquidity. It's an insurance factor. And so I would say it has been a tremendous success as measured by the lack of hot topicness now. I think it's broadened people's understanding, and we really achieved that goal by helping to, just reframe the conversation about engine programs in terms of really what they are, what they do, so people can make a better decision for themselves. So I just wanted to say thanks. I think that's been a tremendous success.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that feedback and those comments. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to provide that resource. As you mentioned, yes, we are almost completed with all of the updates that we're making for this year's guide. And so we will have that back in your hands shortly. Thank you. We only have a few minutes remaining, and I know that Liz has some closing comments that she is going to want to make. We have one other question that came in during the registration. Jason, I'm going to kick it to you, but I'm going to ask you to try to keep it abbreviated. And then, of course, if there's additional information we can provide, we're happy to do that offline. So this is our final question we're going to be taking, but someone asked if we could please discuss how trading a current plane could affect the value of the existing plane as opposed to selling it outright and then negotiating separately the purchase. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Trading an aircraft minimizes brain damage. It makes your life easier, right? Trading an aircraft does not maximize the sales price of your aircraft. So we're happy to help clients by taking aircraft in on trade. We would just rather maximize the sales price of the aircraft they're paying so that they're more effective on the aircraft they're purchasing. But we will absolutely take a trade or get creative in how we do that. List an aircraft for a certain period and then come up with an agreement to take it in on trade after a certain amount of time if it hasn't sold. But if the goal is maximizing the sales price and maximizing your purchase power, that's by separately selling your aircraft and then purchasing the replacement, regardless of whatever order that takes place in.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I agree with Jason. It does help minimize brain damage, but we also are going to do everything in our power to minimize that, whether your transaction is done concurrently or separately. That is one of the values, as Jade mentioned, of working with a selling broker and a buying broker. And we are happy to represent both sides of that equation to maximize your value and minimize your brain damage on both ends. So thank you, Jason, for that. And I do just want to, again, thank CJP for the opportunity to be here and speak with you all today. We're really grateful for the opportunity. We continue to be a resource for you guys, so please feel free to reach out. You do have our contact information. But Liz, I'll pass it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, thank you so much to the jetAVIVA team for coming on. Just a nice reminder to get your calendars ready to join us June 11th in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. jetAVIVA will be sponsoring an event there, a member dinner. So make sure that you set your calendar. Make sure that you join us there. We'll have registration opening quite soon. So just keep an eye. I'll be posting it on the forums and sending out an email. So just make sure that you keep an eye on that. And we hope that you all join us. Again, we will be sending out the recording of this in the next couple of days. Thank you so much to the jetAVIVA.
Yeah, thank you,
everybody.
Emily and the entire team. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob.